This episode of 6'5 Guys is brought to you by Defiance Machine, defying tradition with innovation. Our Bros Rifles, precision on another level. JC Steel Targets, the industry leader in quality AR-500 steel targets.
Welcome to 6'5 Guys. I'm Steve Lawrence.
And I'm Ed Mobley. Now, we get a lot of requests from our audience about the types of targets that we use. We feature them in our load development videos and whatnot. And the answer is these targets are custom creations. Steve's handiwork right here. So what we're going to do is kind of discuss these various targets when we use them, and make them available for you to download.
Yeah, now many of you guys may have found free targets online. There are a number of different sources. We could provide a few links to some of those resources. We've used those as well a while back, but as we started to refine and put more consistency and thought in terms of how we were practicing, we thought it would be helpful to actually modify some of the designs of the targets themselves, because we found some things we liked, some things that we wanted to do or add to the targets that were available, but they weren't the way that we wanted them. So I thought, well, heck, why don't I just create a target design for the things that we want to use? So in some cases, we do a lot of dot drills in our practice.
Right.
Oftentimes, we'll check our zero. In fact, we almost always double check our zero every time we go out to the practice range. And we found it useful to capture some of the environmental information if we're going to redo our ballistics or do load development, as well as do some practice. So
this is our most ubiquitous
this is the one that we will
Yeah.
typically use. I usually print out 30 of these at a time and just keep them in a portfolio in my truck. But it has information on here, such as the date, some of the environmental conditions, and so on. That way, when we're done shooting this target, we can just tear this off. I'll throw it into my range book, or Ned's case, he's got a notebook, and or I can take a picture or a snapshot of this with my iPhone. So one of the design considerations I wanted to have was, because we both shoot mil, I found it helpful to have a mil grid. Particularly if you're trying to zero, precisely, okay, I'm 0.2 or 0.3 mils off.
Right.
That grid is very helpful versus just trying to eyeball.
And so this is a 0.1 mil grid that you have right here.
Correct. Now, what if you're shooting, a scope that is MOA, or inches per 100 yards? You would want a different grid. How do you do that? Well, you can actually go and create your own targets. And so one of the things I wanted to do in this episode is actually walk folks through
how you created them.
How you create these targets, and it's very, very simple. So, why don't we go ahead and jump through that tutorial as we come out of this segment. I'll walk you through kind of a brief tutorial of how you do this within Microsoft PowerPoint, and then we'll come on back. Before we get into the details of actually how to design your own targets, let's spend a few minutes up front talking about paper targets in general, why DIY, and then we'll share a few tips to keep in mind when designing your own targets for precision rifle practice. So why paper targets versus something like shooting steel or clay pigeons or some other physical object? First, most of us tend to practice at a public or club shooting range, and in fact, most of these shooting ranges have rules in place that only paper targets are to be used. Second, a paper target gives you a physical indication to distinguish between your point of aim, or your reticle is at the moment your trigger breaks the shot, and where the bullet impacts, or the POI. The difference is important because it can tell you if your scope is not zeroed, or if you pulled the shot, etc. Thirdly, a paper target allows you to have a physical record of your shooting, so you can pull that target from the target board and take it back home with you for further analysis, or you can log that in a binder as a record of how you shot that day. And lastly, paper targets are unique in that they can be designed specifically for the shooting activity involved, whether it be dot drills, practice, or just plinking. Now, there are innumerable paper targets out there for the variety of shooting activities and needs. Just go to your local sporting goods store and look at the targets on the rack, and there is a wide variety of colors, shapes, sizes. Some are stickers, others are shoot and see, others may have pictures of game to help you get ready for that big hunt. The thing is, these pre-made targets can get expensive if you shoot a lot. So if you want something less expensive, how about free or nearly free? If you go to Bing or Google and type in free targets, you'll find dozens of websites that have free targets. I've listed a handful here. Browse the targets, find the one you like, download and print it out. The only cost is what it takes to print it out on your own paper. Okay, so if you're good with ready-made targets you can buy at the store, or even free ones available, why DIY? Well, we have 3 reasons. First is simply cost. The cost is free versus what you would pay at the store for a pack of targets, which could be substantial depending on the type of targets you're using. Second, you can take a design you like and tailor or customize it to your exact needs. And thirdly, there may not be a target available yet that is exactly what you're looking for, or you may have a new idea for a target that no one's thought of before, and going the DIY route will help you unleash that creativity to improve the effectiveness of your practice sessions. Now let's talk about 6 Five Guys tips to consider as you go about designing your own paper targets. Tip 1 is that your target design should be guided by the primary purpose of the target. For example, if you need a target for zeroing your rifle sights or scope, it's likely you'll need a large target to get you on paper first, a grid for quickly setting your scope turrets, and then a refined target for ensuring the accuracy of your zero. For testing turret tracking, you may need something like the Horus Cat's target that is designed to be 8 feet high and 3 feet wide for doing a complete tracking and calibration test of your scope turrets. If it's precision practice drills, you may likely think about using something like a series of dots for practicing dot drills. And who doesn't go to the range with friends for a little bit of fun? There are countless different target ideas for shooting at targets for practice and fun. And lastly, what about competition? There's a huge variety of standardized targets out there for all types of rifle competition that are designed for testing marksmanship and scoring performance accordingly. The point here is think about what you want to use the target for, and then take this into consideration when you design for that purpose. Tip 2 is to use a target grid. What we mean by a target grid is a series of horizontal and vertical lines that overlay your basic target design, and these lines form a grid square pattern. There are a few key reasons we make this design recommendation. First, this grid pattern on your targets can help you easier distinguish between your point of aim and point of impacts. And this grid can help you gauge distance between the overall size of shot groups if you're using the same point of aim. As you design your spacing for your DIY target, we recommend using the same angular units of measure as your rifle scope. So if your rifle scope has a mil-based reticle and mil turrets, and if you dial 0.1 mil on your elevation turret, you should expect the POI to shift 0.1 mil. A mil radian is equivalent to 36 inches at 1,000 yards, or 0.36 inches at 100 yards. So if we design a mil-based grid for our target to be used at 100 yards, the spacing between our grid lines will be 0.36 inches. If you're using an MOA-based reticle and turret system, 1 MOA equals 1.047 inches at 100 yards, or 1/4 MOA equals 0.26175 inches at 100 yards. And if you design a target for MOA units of measure to be used at 100 yards, you would space the grid lines accordingly. Tip number 3 is if you're designing your target for precision rifle, use refined aiming points. For example, if you use a round 1-inch dot, or even a 1/2 inch dot, it may be relatively more difficult to aim precisely at the center of that target versus using another shape. For example, using the tip of a triangle, the tip of a diamond, or the center of a cross. These offer a more refined aiming point, and also it's easier to gauge offsets of your point of impact versus your point of aim. All right, let's jump into a couple of walkthrough examples of designing your own target. For this, you'll need two things. One, you'll need the Microsoft PowerPoint application and have some familiarity with how to use it. Secondly, you'll need something to print out your target, preferably a color printer. Now, if it rains where you're at, you'll want to use a color laser printer versus an inkjet printer so your target doesn't get washed out if it gets wet. Okay, guys, we're here in Microsoft PowerPoint. We're going to go ahead and get started by opening up the file we're working with. I'm going to be walking you through how to create a target that Ed and I have come up with a couple of years ago. It's our own design, and the way this was set up, it was set up specifically for some of the practice sessions that we have in order to do dot drills. And we'll typically start off by recording the environmental conditions just for record, the date, temp, BP, DA, humidity, and the wind and light conditions. So this is helpful just in case we want to come back and say, okay, for this day, what were the atmospherics like? We also start off with a cold bore shot, just for record to see if that's tracking, if it's moving. It's good to have this historical record just to see where your rifle is holding true on that cold bore shot. And then we're confirming 0, and then we'll do a few untimed dot drills. The next 2 rows are reserved for practicing dot drills, 5 shots each. You'll see that in the first set of drills, the target's a little bit smaller than the untimed. And then the last set of dot drills are even smaller and harder to see, and we typically will cut the par time down for each series of dot drills just to make it a little bit harder. So that was the thought that kind of went into this target design. And then after we're done working on paper, we'll typically move to practicing on still. So to set this up, you'll see that it does have this background grid. And so let's talk a little bit about how to set that up. The grid layout, because we are shooting with mill reticles, mill turrets, is delineated in 0.36 inch increments as far as the spacing. Again, the target's designed to be set at 100 yards. Because we're using an 11.5 by 8.5 inch paper, if you do the math on that, it ends up being 30 columns or 30 squares across and 22 squares or grids top to bottom. Fairly easy to do. Why don't we go ahead and walk through how to do that. So what you want to do is go to View on the menu, and where it says Show, there's an arrow down here. Click on the Show, and it'll bring up a pop-up that says Grids and Guides. Here you would set your spacing. They have increments. You'll want to select Custom and then put in here 0.36 inches. Once that's done, you can go ahead and select OK. At that point, in order to create a grid, all you need to do is insert a table. You can start off with any size table you want. At this point, you would add in however many columns you need to. Going to layout and then insert. Let's go insert right. So you add more columns or more rows, depending on how many you want. In this case, we're going to want 30 columns and 22 rows. And then you can also just get rid of the color coding on this and just make it white with whatever shade borders you want. Now, since I've already had this set up for time's sake, we're going to go ahead and skip past that. I think you guys get the idea of what you need to do. In order to create the information space up at the top, again, fairly easy to do. Just go ahead and insert a table. In this case, it's 2 rows by 7 columns. And you can go ahead and drag that out. and set that up, set the spacing to whatever you want to accommodate the information that you want. And once that's set up, you can go ahead and fill that in with the information you want. So in this case, we're going to have a space for date and then your environmental wind and light conditions. Okay, the next step we're going to do is go ahead and put in or separate the space into the three areas that we had. So it looks something like this. Fairly easy to do because each of these rows are basically 6 cells high and the entire width of this grid wide. We're just going to highlight what we want, and then we can set the color of the border to black and just make it a little bit darker. Let's go 2.5 and select outside borders. And once that's done, we can just go ahead and do that again. And this is the last one. So using that same procedure, we're going to go ahead and work on this top space, which will have our cold bore shot, zero confirmation, and our 3 end time dot drills. First, going to start off with the cold bore. So, simply insert a text box, type in cold bore. Now, this particular dot is nothing more than a circle. Fairly easy to insert those. If you go to insert at the top and then your shapes, you have a lot of different shapes to choose from. There's one here that is a circle, and so you simply draw that circle, and we want to kind of stick within the grid. So because each of these grid squares is 0.1 mil at 100 yards or 0.36 inches, we're going to make this fit within that space. Okay. And then you can color it any way you want. You can change the color of the border. In this case, we have a gray background and a black border. And to create the middle one, it's nothing more than taking another circle and making it that same size. Again, you're going to size it to fit within that grid. And you can color it again. So in this case, we're going to go red background, yellow border. And in order to get the grid squares on top of it, you simply take this circle and push it to the back. So we're going to go ahead and send this to the back. And you'll see now that it actually has a grid on here. We're going to make this red crosshair much heavier. So we're actually now selecting the grid. And instead of having a light gray grid, we're going to change this to white. Select the pin color to white, and then we're going to use the inside borders, and there you go. All right, so that's our cold bore target. Now for the zero target, it's very much the same thing. It's simply a matter of taking another circle, and again, in this case, we can change that to yellow. This cross is nothing more than triangles, and I'm just going to demonstrate how you do that. Again, you go back to your shapes. We're going to select a triangle, and in this case, we're going to make this black and the border black. Actually, let's go no border. So once that's set, you can simply take that and create more of these. And you can move them around to create your cross. Okay, so I think you guys get the idea of how that's done. So that's basically how this zero confirmation target was set up. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of these other targets. These, again, same thing as this cold board, just different colors. In this case, I used a bright green background and a bright red circle. Now I want to move these, I would actually want to create a cross on the front using these grid squares. So we'll go ahead and take these and we'll move them to the back. And these grid squares are actually this 0.1 mil grid. And I simply changed these, instead of making them gray, made them white. So that stands out on that background. So let's move on to the next set of targets, which are the time dot drills. Here I'm using a yellow diamond with a red circle. So again, we would insert a shape. In this case, it's nothing more than a square. So once that square is set up, I can rotate that shape. To make it a diamond. And so I'm going to go ahead and change this to yellow background with a black border. And it looks like the border needs to be a little bit thicker in terms of weight. And again, the circle is nothing more than a red circle with a slight black background. So that's how that shape was created. And again, to make a nice refined aiming point, we want a white cross on this to stand out against that red circle. The way we do that is we actually take this and we're going to send it to the background, send it to the back, and I actually have a white cross set up on these grids. So why don't we go ahead and replicate that across. So simply taking that same shape, copying it 4 times into the space, and as far as changing this from white, why don't we actually go back to the way that was. Originally, this was looked like that. It was a gray background, or a gray grid, 3/4, and I'm changing it to white, and it's a 3-point. Pretty easy. All right, so the last set of targets are these iron cross type shapes. And again, as I had demonstrated with this zero confirmation target, it's nothing more than a series of black triangles. So again, we insert a shape. Whoops. Once I get my basic shape, I can take it and copy it. Okay, easy peasy, right? So that's how it's done. So go ahead and copy that over 4 more times and you have your targets set up. Now, what I normally do, just as a review, is first create the grid, In this case, it's 0.36 inch grid, which is for a mill-based reticle system, placing the target at 100 yards. Once that's set up, I go ahead, create my shapes for my targets, and then place them. Make sure that the color is what I want, and then if I want to actually have some sort of a cross on it, I can use this grid itself and change the color from gray to white or whatever color just to make it stand out by having that grid placed over the shapes within PowerPoint, because PowerPoint has a series of different layers. So depending on where you place that object in the layer group, whatever's on top is going to show through. So that's how that's done. Now, there are a lot of different options, things that we played with. This particular example is a target that we use for typically a load workup. I'll print out several of these and use this for a load workup, basically shooting shots at a particular target for a specific load. Another one I came up with is this. This is just a standard practice target that gives me a lot of different refined aiming points. I can also use this for doing a zero of my rifle scope, and then once it's zeroed, I can actually use this to shoot at a lot of different targets. So, the tips of the diamonds, the tips of the arrows, the tips of these squares, and so on. So, again, the space is wide open to be creative, and you can actually unleash your own creativity to DIY targets.
Wow, Steve, that was really good. And if I ever need help with PowerPoint, I'm going to come to you. And yeah, I mean, these targets are fantastic. Again, this is a great 100-yard target. We tend to do our dot drills on these. What I like are the diamond corners, because sometimes I find that I get the smallest groups if I aim like right at
it's a much more precise point.
At a corner or something. These, a lot of times are easy to just kind of center the reticle on there. And then these are very nice for 200 yards.
Yeah, for 200 yards, or, if a lot of times if I'm trying to zero, I just find a bigger target because, if I do a cold bore shot, a lot of times I can get to about a 3-inch group just doing it's not cold bore.
Just sighting down the barrel.
Just a bore sighting my rifle.
Yep.
If I remount a scope or something like that, and then I can.
This is very easy to see.
Yeah, it's very very easy to see
through your barrel. Yeah, through your barrel. And then this grid right here.
That grid was developed if I basically wanted to expand. So let's say I'm not on paper yet. I can take some of these targets and just add it around.
Oh, that's very clever.
On a target board.
Right, so you can just go like that.
Yeah, so I can stack 3 or 4 around it, and just to get it on paper.
No, that's very clever. And then this guy right here, again, I like the diamonds right here. So you can, again, the kind of diamond grid thing.
And with PowerPoint, there's the limitation is only your imagination, your design. So whatever design ideas you have, you can very, very easily create your own targets to what you think is useful for you.
Okay, well, Steve, thanks for that tutorial, and these will all be available for download. And as a special bonus, your PowerPoint with the moving targets and so forth will also be available, because I can't tell you how many people ask.
It has been a very, very common question. So that was the thought behind this episode was, hey, we'll provide you the files, we'll provide you with some information of how you can actually do this on your own.
And again, feel free to plagiarize, share with your friends or whatever. I mean, they're not like, we're putting these out here in the...
Yeah, they're not copyrighted.
Yeah, we're putting them out in the public domain, so just have at it.
Guys, hopefully you found this useful. Give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and until next time, remember, life's an adventure.
Stay on target, literally.